The cabin rose out of the darkness like it had been waiting for us. I remember thinking how ordinary it seemed at first, almost quaint, with its weathered wooden walls and small chimney. But something in the way the forest opened up around it felt deliberate, calculated. The trees seemed to bend away, leaving a perfect path that led straight to the door. We stepped inside cautiously. The air hit us first, stale, heavy, and metallic. It carried the scent of damp wood and something far more sinister beneath it. There was blood. I could smell it even before I saw anything. On the table lay a note, block letters, precise and cold. "Welcome to the Pine Hollow survival game. Only one leaves alive. Choose wisely." We stared at it. None of us said a word at first. Then the door slammed behind us. The sound rattled the walls and echoed in my chest. Locked. No way out. The rules were simple in writing, but impossible in reality. We were trapped. Every choice we made that night would carry consequences none of us were prepared for. I moved cautiously through the first room, flashlight in hand. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that moved as if the cabin itself were breathing. The floorboards creaked underfoot. Every noise felt magnified, every movement a risk. Inside, I found the first challenge, a small locked box with a note inside. Sacrifice or be sacrificed. I knew immediately it wasn't metaphor. Someone had planned this. Someone was orchestrating the night like a conductor with deadly precision. Shouts came from the other rooms. One of my friends had triggered another trap, and panic spread like wildfire. We argued briefly over what to do, but the air had grown too heavy for reason. Survival was becoming instinct. Hours, or maybe minutes, time lost all meaning, passed as we navigated the puzzles and traps. Each one was designed to pit us against each other. Tasks were simple at first: retrieve a key, unlock a door, figure out a sequence. But soon choices carried life or death consequences. Hesitation could be fatal. Action could be fatal. The cabin was alive with tension. Shadows seemed to shift on their own. The air pressed down like a weight. I could feel the eyes of the host everywhere, even though I never saw him. By the time we reached the central room, the stakes were clear. Only one of us could leave alive. The realization hit like ice in my veins. I looked at my friends. Fear had hollowed their faces, and yet in their eyes I could see the same resolve mirrored in my own. The final task was revealed, a simple instruction on a blood-stained board. It demanded a choice none of us wanted to make. Who would act first? Who would hesitate? The wrong decision meant death. Screams echoed from a side room. One of my friends had already fallen. The sound of panic and betrayal filled the cabin, pressing in from all sides. I knew then the game had reached its true form. Not about skill, not about luck, but about instinct, and who could betray or endure the longest. We circled each other warily, every move calculated. The host was unseen, but his influence was palpable. Every decision we made was exactly what he wanted: fear, mistrust, and desperation. The night dragged on, unrelenting. Each room revealed a new challenge, another moral puzzle designed to break us down. I had to keep my wits. One wrong move could cost my life, or worse, the life of someone I still cared for. Eventually, the three of us were alone in the central room. The rules had been written in blood, etched into the walls. Only one survives. The other's fate had already been sealed. We faced the final test together. There was no compromise, no escape, just the suffocating weight of the night and the understanding that only one of us would emerge. I watched them. Saw fear, desperation, and the creeping realization that survival came at a terrible cost. I felt it in myself, too, the primal instinct clawing to take control, to do whatever it took to make it through. The cabin seemed to close around us, shadows deepening, air thickening. The host remained unseen, but I knew he was there somewhere, watching, waiting for the final act. And in that moment, I understood the truth of the Pine Hollow survival game. It wasn't about escaping the traps, solving the puzzles, or even making it through the night. It was about enduring the night and enduring it alone. The final choices were made in silence. Decisions, sharp as knives, determined who would breathe and who would fall. By the end, only one of us remained standing, trembling and hollow-eyed, knowing that the night had changed everything, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cabin felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lamp, every shadow cast by the uneven light seemed deliberate, like the house itself was testing us. We huddled in the central room, the note still lying on the table. Only one survives, choose wisely. I tried to make sense of it, tried to plan, but there was no plan. The air pressed against our lungs, thick and suffocating, and fear wrapped around us like a vice. The first real challenge came soon after. A door in the corner slid open, revealing a narrow hallway dimly lit by a single swinging bulb. A table sat at the end, holding 3 small boxes. Each had a keyhole. The note explained the rules. Open a box, follow its instructions, and survive. Ignore it, and risk death. We stared at the boxes. Tension thickened the air, and I could feel it gnawing at my mind. Every heartbeat echoed in the silence. I reached for a box. Inside, a small vial of liquid and a note. Drink or risk the consequences. Only one choice is correct. I hesitated. My friends hesitated, and that hesitation was exactly what the host wanted. The night dragged on with challenges that grew more sinister and complex. We were forced into decisions that tested trust and morality. Each choice carried a tangible weight. Fail, and the consequences were immediate. One of my friends, Emily, made her choice first. She drank. Her body convulsed. Panic rose in all of us. But she survived. It was a cruel reminder. The host had designed everything to break us, to twist our instincts into fear, betrayal, and self-preservation. Next, another door opened, revealing a puzzle on the floor, a pattern of tiles, each marked with a symbol. Step wrong, and a trap would trigger. We moved carefully, weighing each decision. Every glance, every hesitation, every instinct was magnified. I could hear the host's presence in my mind, not his voice, not a shadow, but a certainty that he was there, watching, calculating, enjoying the psychological torment. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning in that cabin. We were stripped of everything familiar, comfort, logic, trust. Only the game existed, only survival mattered. Tensions boiled over. Arguments erupted over strategy, over who should go first, over who might betray whom. Accusations flew, blame sharpened like knives, then the first death. It was Marcus, or maybe it was Jason. I never wanted to remember exactly who. The scream ripped through the cabin, raw, human, terrifying. We froze. Our hearts pounded, our stomachs turned. I could smell the metallic tang of blood, thick in the air. The rules were clear. Only one survives. The host's message wasn't just in words. It was in the traps, in the rooms, in every cruel decision he forced us to make. We learned quickly. Hesitation was dangerous, but action was just as deadly. By the time we reached the inner rooms, only 3 remained. We were pushed to our limits, physically and mentally. Exhaustion clawed at our bodies. Fear ate at our minds, and still, the challenges continued. A door opened to reveal a maze of ropes and pulleys. We had to navigate it to reach a key that would unlock the final room. Step wrong, and a mechanism above could drop something lethal. I led, my heart hammering, my every sense screaming. Behind me, my remaining friends followed, wary and exhausted. The cabin seemed to respond to us, shifting, creaking, threatening. Every move was deliberate, every breath measured. And then the final test loomed. A single room, doors locked from the outside, a table with instructions written in blood. Only one may leave. Decide now. I looked at them. Fear and exhaustion mirrored in their eyes. We all understood. Only one of us would survive this night. The game had stripped away everything. Trust, hope, friendship. Only the primal instinct to survive remained. We moved forward, knowing that the next choice could be the last any of us would ever make. The final room felt different. Colder, darker, heavier. The air hung with the metallic smell of blood and fear. Only 3 of us remained. Exhaustion pressed down on our shoulders, and the adrenaline that had carried us through earlier challenges now throbbed like a second heartbeat in my chest. The note on the table was smeared, the words written in the same meticulous block letters as before. Only one may leave. Decide now. Choose wisely, or perish together. We looked at each other, and in that moment, the illusion of trust shattered. Fear had already begun to eat away at our humanity. No one spoke. No one could. I examined the room. It was simple, almost innocuous, yet every element radiated danger. Chairs had been arranged deliberately, each at a precise distance from one another. The walls bore scratches, etched names, desperate marks from previous players. A single lamp flickered overhead, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. We all understood the truth. The host would not intervene physically. He didn't need to. The game's design would do his work. It was a test of instinct, morality, and sheer willpower. The first choice came quickly. On the table lay 3 keys and 3 small vials, each labeled with instructions. One key would unlock the final door, and one vial contained a solution that would neutralize a deadly mechanism set to trigger if the wrong door was chosen. The other 2 keys and vials were traps. We argued at first, tried to reason, to strategize, but logic was useless. Exhaustion made every calculation flawed. Fear distorted perception, and in this cabin, mistakes were fatal. Emily reached first. She picked a vial, then hesitated over the keys. Her hands trembled, sweat dripping down her forehead. I could see her pulse thumping in her neck. Time felt endless. Suddenly, the first trap triggered. A ceiling panel dropped, narrowly missing her. The noise reverberated through the cabin like thunder. Screams tore through the air. My own chest heaved as panic surged. We scattered instinctively, each of us calculating our next move in the few seconds we had before the next trap could strike. One of my friends, Marcus, moved too quickly. He grabbed a key without inspecting the vial. A sharp mechanism triggered beneath his feet, slicing through the air. He fell, screaming, clutching at his leg. Blood spread across the floor like ink in water. Emily froze. I froze. It was happening. It was happening. The game was claiming its victims one by one. I moved cautiously, every sense heightened, aware that the shadows themselves might be a threat. The flickering lamp revealed the final arrangement. 1 vial, 1 key, 1 correct choice, and 1 chance to survive. I could hear Emily whispering, her voice quivering, almost pleading. Who's going first? The question hung in the air, impossible to answer. I realized then that fear was a weapon more powerful than any trap, more precise than any mechanism. The host had designed this room to strip us of every ounce of rational thought. Time slowed. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in my skull. Every breath was heavy, and the metallic scent of blood filled my nostrils. I made my choice. Hands shaking, I reached for a key and vial simultaneously. My mind raced, every calculation a desperate attempt to cheat death. Emily and Marcus watched, each of them frozen by fear and the weight of the inevitable. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. The vials were not what we expected. One contained a substance that would neutralize the traps. The others were harmless, but the host had anticipated that we would overthink, hesitate, second-guess. The real threat was human instinct itself. Marcus lunged suddenly. For a split second, everything went wrong. Hands collided, a vial dropped, glass shattered. The sound of it, sharper than a gunshot, made the cabin vibrate. Emily screamed. Marcus fell. I acted on pure instinct. The correct vial was in my hand. The key was right. I unlocked the door. My breath ragged, heart hammering. The lamp flickered one last time, then silence. Emily and Marcus, gone. Only I remained. I stumbled through the door, into the cold night air, collapsing on the damp forest floor. The cabin loomed behind me, silent now, as if satisfied with its work. I was alive, but I was hollowed, changed. The night had stripped away more than my friends. It had stripped away a part of myself. I couldn't feel relief. Not yet. Not really. Only the weight of survival, the memory of their screams, and the certainty that someone or something had designed this night with meticulous cruelty. I lay on the forest floor, shaking, watching the cabin through the shadows. The Pine Hollow survival game had ended. For me, I forced myself to stand, even though my legs trembled and my chest ached from adrenaline and exhaustion. The forest was silent, almost unnatural in its stillness. Pine needles pressed into my palms as I crawled toward the cabin, drawn by something I didn't want to confront. The door hung slightly ajar now, the key still in my hand, cold and heavy. I stepped inside again, the smell hitting me first. Blood, sweat, fear. Every surface seemed saturated with the horror that had unfolded. The room where we had faced the final challenge was a tableau of panic and desperation. Chairs overturned, glass shards scattered across the floor, vials shattered, leaving a faint chemical odor. I moved carefully, almost ceremoniously, as if touching anything might trigger another trap. The names etched on the walls caught my eye again. My friends' names scratched beside faint, frantic symbols. I traced them with my finger, feeling the weight of their terror, the fear that had seized them before they died. The host had designed everything with precision. It wasn't just the traps, the challenges, or the moral dilemmas. It was the atmosphere, the fear, the subtle pressure that made every action feel dangerous. I felt it in every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lamp, every shadow that seemed to twitch when I wasn't looking directly at it. It was a psychological labyrinth. The cabin had become a maze of terror, each corner holding memories of screams and betrayal. I saw Emily's bag in the corner, torn open. Personal items strewn across the floor. Her water bottle, a notebook, a scarf still damp with sweat. It was intimate evidence of someone who had lived and suffered there. Marcus's jacket was draped over a chair, stained and torn. I swallowed hard. I couldn't bring myself to think of what had really happened in the moments I hadn't witnessed. Only fragments of memory, shards of horror, came to mind. I moved to the center of the room, staring at the note on the table. It had been there the entire night, like a silent overseer, guiding the rules of survival. Only one survives. Choose wisely. I had. But survival felt empty, hollow. I realized then that the host had anticipated every possible reaction. He had designed not only the traps, but the emotional landscape, the panic, the mistrust, the moral collapse, and he had done it without ever appearing. He was present in the silence, in the air, in the lingering scent of fear. I examined the remaining rooms again, one by one. Each held reminders of the game's design, mechanical traps carefully rigged, notes detailing impossible choices, subtle clues meant to mislead. The psychological toll was staggering. My hands shook as I traced a final note tucked beneath a floorboard. Survive the night, and the truth becomes yours. Fail, and you become part of the lesson. I realized the host had set this entire night as an experiment, a study of human instinct, morality, and desperation. The cabin itself had become a character in the night, part prison, part observer, part executioner. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, breathing hard. My body screamed for rest, but my mind refused to quiet. The weight of what had happened pressed down. The faces of my friends, the sound of their screams, the decisions I had made, all intertwined into a haunting rhythm in my chest. Outside, the wind shifted. Pine needles rustled. The shadows of trees stretched across the cabin walls. I understood then that the night was far from over. Not because the game continued, but because its impact would linger forever. Even if I left this place alive, I would never leave the night behind. The host had designed it that way. To survive was not enough. To survive meant carrying the weight of everything that had been lost, everything that had been forced upon us, and everything that had been orchestrated by an unseen mind that thrived on fear. I rose slowly, feeling the cold of the floor seep into my bones. I had won the game, but I was not victorious. I moved toward the door, key in hand, ready to step into the forest. And yet I glanced back one last time at the cabin. It waited, silent, patient, unfinished. The forest outside was silent, too silent. I couldn't tell if it was the hour or if the world itself had paused to watch what had happened inside the cabin. My lungs burned as I moved cautiously back into the shadows near the cabin's edge. The moon broke through the trees intermittently, casting jagged shapes across the ground that seemed to shift and move as I stepped. I had survived, but the game wasn't finished. Not entirely. The cabin had left pieces behind. Traps and puzzles I hadn't noticed, mechanical whispers of the host's cruel design. The first real challenge in this next stage was instinct. I could hear a faint ticking somewhere inside the cabin, a low, deliberate sound. My heart synced with it, each tick a reminder that time was still the host's weapon. I crept toward the cabin once more, every nerve screaming that I might trigger another trap. The door was unlocked this time, or at least it appeared so. Inside, the central room had shifted. Chairs were stacked differently, the vials had disappeared, and a new note lay on the table. You've survived the first trials. Only the final remains. Your choices now will seal everything. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every scream, every betrayal, every decision I had made that night pressing down on me. Then I noticed it, a small device on the floor, blinking red. It looked harmless, but I knew better. The host had taught me that nothing in this cabin was harmless. I crouched, studying it, a puzzle, a lock mechanism, and then a sound behind me, a soft shuffle, barely perceptible. I spun. Nothing. But the feeling remained. Someone was observing, even if it wasn't human. The host's presence was everywhere, intangible but undeniable. I turned back to the device. A sequence of numbers etched onto its surface, a code. The note had hinted at the key to survive. Logic, instinct, and fear warred inside me. One wrong move, and it would be over. I thought about Emily, Marcus. The weight of their faces in my mind made my hands shake as I worked the mechanism. Time seemed elastic, stretching every second into an eternity. Then came the moral dilemma. A second device had appeared across the room. A choice, cruel and precise. Disarm the trap and risk my own life, or leave it and ensure the device claimed me if I failed the code. The rules were clear, only survival mattered, and the host had designed it so that morality itself was a hazard. I hesitated, and that hesitation almost killed me. A sharp hiss from the device made me jump, and I realized it had been armed. Sweat ran down my face, and I bit my lip to keep from shaking audibly. Logic snapped into overdrive. I recalled the sequence, aligned it with what I remembered from previous puzzles, and pressed the final button. The device clicked, neutralized. I breathed out, slow and deliberate, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. But the host wasn't done. A loud crash from the far side of the cabin made me spin. A new trap? Or perhaps a manipulation designed to test my resolve. Every sense screamed danger. My stomach churned, adrenaline surged, and I forced myself to move forward. The final room awaited, marked by a single red light above the door. A warning or a lure, it didn't matter. Only one could leave. I knew it. I stepped inside. The room was simple, minimal, but the weight of every life lost, every scream, every betrayal that night filled the air. The host had stripped away everything else, leaving only the essence of the survival game. And then I understood the final challenge, the psychological test, the host's masterpiece. A mirror on the wall reflected me. Alone, exhausted, hollow. The note beneath it was blunt. Face yourself, only the survivor may leave. I realized that the host's game had never been about traps or puzzles or even the physical dangers. It had been about breaking us, stripping away humanity until only raw instinct remained. I stared at my reflection. Every choice, every moral compromise, every act of survival etched into my face. The night had changed me, and I had survived, but the cost was everything I had known, everything I had been. The host's final message was clear. The night itself was the punishment, the victory, and the experiment. I had survived. The rest were gone. I left the cabin, the key still warm in my hand, the forest stretching endlessly around me. The night was silent once again, but the echoes of what had occurred would linger forever. The forest was darker now, though the moon occasionally pierced the canopy in thin, cold slivers. Every step I took toward the cabin, or away from it, I wasn't sure anymore. The night had warped time and space. Each shadow seemed alive. Each whisper of wind could be a trap. I returned, drawn by a compulsion I didn't understand. The cabin had more to reveal, and I knew instinctively that the game wasn't over until the host said it was. Inside, the central room had transformed again. The chairs were arranged differently, forming a rough circle. The walls bore new marks, as if someone or something had walked the perimeter, observing, noting, judging. And in the middle of the circle sat a box. It wasn't large, just enough to hold a few items, but the aura around it screamed significance. A note lay on top. Choose wisely. Only one may leave. The final act begins now. I approached cautiously, hands trembling. The air was thick, scented with smoke and something acrid like chemicals. Inside the box were 3 objects: a knife, a vial of clear liquid, and a folded note. The folded note had the simplest instruction of all. One survives, the others cannot. The knife was pristine, gleaming under the flickering light. The vial smelled faintly sweet, almost innocuous. My mind raced. Logic, fear, instinct, they warred inside me. I realized the host had stripped the challenge down to its essence. The previous rooms, traps, and puzzles were nothing more than preparation. This was the true test. What would I do when survival demanded a moral choice? The sound of movement caught my attention. Not from the forest, not from the shadows, but from inside the cabin itself. Emily? Marcus? No. Only echoes, memories, shadows of those we had lost. I knew then that the host had designed the night to isolate us completely, not physically, but psychologically. The real danger was the weight of conscience, the terror of choice. I examined the objects again. The knife, easy to use, lethal, a tool of immediate action. The vial, uncertain, possibly safe, possibly fatal. The note, a reminder that only one could survive. I thought of Emily's trembling hands, Marcus's desperation, their eyes filled with fear moments before their deaths. And then I understood the final cruel twist. The night had always been about instinct, survival, but it was also about complicity. Choosing to survive meant accepting the consequences, witnessing the aftermath, living with the blood on my hands, whether direct or indirect. I picked up the knife. My hands were steady now. The earlier panic had given way to a grim determination. Every sound in the cabin seemed to amplify. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of the lamp, the faintest shift of air. I knew the host was watching, always watching, not just observing my actions but dissecting them, savoring every instinctive decision. A door at the far end of the room creaked open. My heart leapt, the exit, the path to survival. But there was one final requirement. I had to decide. Truly. Commit. Survival demanded action. Hesitation would mean death or worse, remaining trapped in the psychological prison the host had constructed. I glanced around the cabin one last time. Every mark, every shadow, every object whispered the story of the night. The screams, the chaos, the moral compromises, they all led to this moment. I held the knife tightly, inhaled deeply, and stepped toward the door. One step, another. The final choice awaited. The door loomed ahead, dark and silent. I hesitated, feeling the weight of every life lost pressing on my shoulders. The knife in my hand felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the memories of that night within its cold metal. I paused at the threshold, listening. The cabin was quiet now, too quiet. The air was thick, almost solid with tension. I realized something chilling. The host wasn't there in person, never had been. His presence had been in every shadow, every trap, every choice forced upon us. The cabin itself had been the instrument of his cruelty. I stepped inside the final corridor, leading away from the central room. The lamp flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each sound magnified by fear and exhaustion. A faint ticking echoed somewhere in the distance. Instinctively, I slowed my pace, every sense alert. I could feel the history of the night, the screams, the panic, the betrayal, resonating in the walls. It was as if the cabin remembered everything. The corridor opened into a small chamber. A table sat in the center, empty except for a single envelope. No note, no instructions, just the envelope. I approached cautiously. The paper was thick, heavy. Inside, a single sheet. Survival is meaningless without truth. Do you understand what you have done? The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into a chair, trembling. I had survived, but at what cost? The host's design had forced every instinct, every moral decision, every act of self-preservation into sharp relief. There was no glory here, no victory, only the awareness that human nature could be manipulated to its breaking point. I thought of Emily and Marcus. Their faces haunted me. I had acted to survive, yes, but I had also betrayed the instincts of friendship, trust, and cooperation that had initially bound us together. And yet, instinct had won. Survival had won. I could feel the host's presence in the envelope's words, in the shadows, in the thick air of the cabin. It was a final observation, a reminder that the night had not ended. The psychological impact would linger, unrelenting. I rose, trying to steady my shaking legs. The knife still felt like it weighed a ton in my hands. I left the chamber. The corridor led me to a window overlooking the forest. Moonlight glinted on the dew-soaked pine needles. The night was calm now, almost serene, but I knew better. I could still hear the echoes, the screams, the panic, the fear. It was all etched into my mind, permanent, unyielding. I realized that the host had designed the night to leave no one unscarred, no matter who survived. The final act was clear now. Survival was only the beginning. Living with the consequences, the moral cost, the memories of what I had endured and what others had suffered, that was the true challenge. I looked back at the cabin, silent, empty, waiting, and I understood that no one left Pine Hollow unchanged. No one. The night had been a mirror, and I had stared too long. The door opened with a groan, the cold night air rushing in. I stepped out cautiously, boots sinking slightly into the damp forest floor. The moonlight was pale, casting long, distorted shadows across the pine needles. Every rustle made me jump. Every distant snap of a branch set my nerves taut. I wasn't running yet. Not really. I was moving cautiously, alert, trying to anticipate whatever the host might have left behind. The forest felt alive. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the trees. It was the echoes of that night, amplified, twisting everything familiar into something threatening. I remembered the screams, the panic, the betrayal. Every sound, every reaction, every choice was imprinted in my mind. I could still hear Emily's voice in my head, Marcus's face in the shadows, and yet the forest itself seemed to mock me. I stumbled over roots, my heart hammering. The knife in my hand felt heavy again, a constant reminder of the night's horrors. Then I saw it, a figure or a shadow between the trees, not human, not fully, just enough to make my skin crawl. I froze. The figure did nothing, no movement, no sound, just watched. I swallowed, forcing myself to move. Step by step, I kept my gaze fixed forward, pretending not to see it. The path was narrow, winding, and treacherous. Branches clawed at my arms, thorns tore at my jacket. Every movement reminded me that the night was still a predator, and I was prey. Another shadow shifted. Another whisper in the wind. My mind raced. Was the host following, watching, or was this just my imagination, the culmination of fear and exhaustion? I had survived the cabin. I had survived the traps, the moral dilemmas, the psychological torment. But I realized survival outside wasn't automatic. The host's design didn't end at the door. It extended into the forest, into the night, into the very way I perceived the world. I paused, breath misting in the cold air. The figure, or the shadow, remained. And then I saw the final clue. A small marker on the ground, a symbol carved into a tree, the same as those inside the cabin, the host's signature. I understood then that I wasn't free. Not yet. The game had one last demand, confrontation with fear itself. I pressed on, every step deliberate. The forest seemed endless, the shadows endless, the night endless. And yet I kept moving. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to flee, to run blindly. But I didn't. I moved toward the faintest glimmer of light in the distance, a promise or a trap, I didn't know which. The forest closed around me. Shadows stretched, twisted, whispered. And in that moment, I realized the night had won. I had survived the cabin, yes, but the psychological hunt, the torment, the memory of the night's horrors, they were inescapable. Every step I took carried the weight of everything I had endured. The wind shifted again. Pine needles rustled. The shadows moved in ways that made my heart hammer. I was alive, but the night had changed me forever. The forest held its breath, watching, patient, silent, and I understood the truth. There would never be another night like this. But the memory of it would last forever. The forest had grown colder. The moon, now high and distant, cast pale silver light across the damp pine needles. Shadows stretched endlessly, twisting and shifting with every slight breeze. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet earth, mingling with the coppery tang of blood still fresh in my memory. Every step I took crunched against branches, needles, and the unseen remnants of traps the host had left in his wake. My legs ached, my lungs burned, and yet I moved. Survival demanded it. I thought I understood the night, its patterns, its designs, the cruel logic of its creator. But now, moving through the forest's endless corridors, I realized the game had always been larger than the cabin. Larger than the vials, the keys, the knives, the traps, and the moral dilemmas. The host had designed the night itself as a living extension of his experiment. Every shadow was a reminder, every whisper of wind a judgment, every rustle of needles beneath my feet a measurement of my instinct. The knife still hung loosely in my hand, a cold anchor to the reality of what had transpired. I remembered Emily's eyes, Marcus's hands, their panic, their trust betrayed by circumstance and the mechanics of the game, and the guilt hit me harder than any trap could. I had survived, but their absence pressed down on me with a suffocating weight. I had acted to live, yes, but the cost was the absolute silence where their voices should have been. A faint glow appeared between the trees. It wasn't bright, but it pierced the darkness like a beacon. My mind warned me. It could be a trick, a final manipulation by the host. Every instinct screamed caution, but fatigue and desperation edged out indecision. Step by step, I moved closer. The forest seemed to bend around me, the shadows elongating, moving with a sentience that mocked my every breath. I stumbled, catching myself against the rough bark of a pine tree. The sound of snapping twigs behind me made my heart jump, though no one was there. My mind conjured the ghosts of the night. Marcus falling to a trap I hadn't prevented, Emily frozen with indecision, the final moments in the cabin etched into my memory with horrifying clarity. The host's genius, terrifying in its simplicity, was that the fear never left. It had followed us into the forest, into the night, into the very marrow of my bones. The glow grew brighter. A clearing emerged ahead, faintly illuminated by moonlight, reflecting off what appeared to be a shallow pool of water. The surface rippled faintly, though no wind moved it. I approached, cautious, tense, every muscle coiled with adrenaline. This was it. The final stage, the culmination of the night's carefully orchestrated terror. I knelt at the edge of the water and saw my reflection, pale, hollowed, eyes wide with exhaustion and dread. And then I realized the host's final truth wasn't a trap, not in the mechanical sense. It was a mirror. The game had always been about observation, testing not just instinct, but morality, fear, and the human psyche. To survive was to face yourself in your rawest, most vulnerable form, stripped of the illusions of safety, friendship, or morality. I sank to my knees, the cold seeping through my clothes, the knife pressing against the forest floor beside me. I had survived every trap, every manipulation, every puzzle. I had made decisions that preserved my life while condemning my friends, whether by design or circumstance. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of the night's cruelty settle over me like a suffocating fog. A sudden rustle made me spin. Nothing, just the trees. But the tension remained, taut and electric. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind whispered judgments, threats, memories. The night had become an extension of the host's mind, a relentless presence that would haunt me long after the first light of dawn. I realized something else. Survival was never about escaping. It was about enduring. Enduring the memories, the guilt, the fear that had been distilled into every moment of the night. The host had ensured that even in victory there was no peace. The game's true victory belonged to him, the orchestrator, the unseen puppeteer, the silent observer who had watched 4 lives collapse and leave only one behind. I rose slowly, boots crunching against the forest floor, eyes scanning the shadows. The clearing, the pool, the faint glimmers of moonlight, they offered nothing more than a place to confront myself. I was alive. My friends were gone. The night had claimed everything else, and yet I survived. The realization was bitter, hollow, and suffocating. Survival alone could not undo the choices, the screams, the terror. The host's final lesson echoed in my mind. Instinct alone was not enough. Morality, empathy, trust, they had all been tested, broken, and reshaped. And I had passed, at a cost that would never be repaid. I looked back at the cabin through the trees, faintly visible, looming like a silent sentinel. The windows were dark, shadows still clinging to their corners. The traps, the puzzles, the instruments of fear, everything remained, waiting for the next night, the next victims, the next experiment. I exhaled a long, ragged sound, the first release of tension since the night began. But relief did not come, only exhaustion and the deep, permanent knowledge that I had been part of something designed to break human beings to their core. I moved away from the clearing, each step careful, deliberate. My eyes flicked constantly to the shadows, my ears straining for any whisper, any noise that could signal danger. But the forest was silent now, almost respectfully. Perhaps it recognized that the night had run its course. Perhaps it was just a lull before memory took over, before the echoes of screams and panic would return to haunt me forever. The night had ended, and yet I knew it would never truly be over. I had survived Pine Hollow, but Pine Hollow had survived me, and I would carry it with me, always.